conversation amongst Prince Hall Freemasons where we discuss topics relative to craft Freemasonry. My name is Brother Antonio Caffey, and I currently serve as the Worshipful Master of the Corey Adams Lodge of Research and Education. I'm also a proud past master of St. Mark's Lodge number 7, located in Columbus, Ohio. Both lodges are chartered by the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Ohio, where the Honorable Carl A. Williams serves as the Most Worshipful Grand Master. I also have the privilege of serving as the Right Worshipful Grand Historian of the Grand Lodge. Before I let the other brothers introduce themselves, I would like to state that the views and opinions that are expressed by us tonight in no way reflect the views and opinions of the Grand Lodge in which we hold membership in, or the lodges that we hold membership in. Also, if you have any questions, please feel free to post them on our Facebook page, and if we have time at the end of the conversation, we'll do our best to try to answer them. At this time, I'll let the other brethren introduce themselves. Brother Morgan.
Thank you, Brother Caffey. My name is James Morgan III. I currently serve as Worshipful Master, Corinthian Lodge number 18. I'm also Senior Warden of the David A. McWilliams Research and Education Lodge, and I formerly served also as the Worshipful Assistant Grand Historian for the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of D.C. I'm very happy to be here this evening with you all once again. It's a pleasure.
All right, I'm past master of the Mount Pisgah Lodge number 53, located. Let me back up. My name is Dave Lewis Gillon Jr. I'm a past master of the Mount Pisgah Lodge number 53, located in Columbus, Georgia. And I also had the pleasure of serving as Grand Historian for the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Georgia. And just a pleasure to be here. And I'm looking forward. It's going to be a very interesting show.
Thank you. And we also have Brother Ken Collins, who's with us, but we're trying to work out some technical difficulties.
I'm good to go.
Oh, there he is, Brother Ken Collins.
Outstanding. Good evening, everybody. I'm Ken Collins. I serve as the Right Worshipful Grand Lodge Historian for the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Alabama, and also a member of Pride of North Birmingham Lodge number 319 out of Birmingham.
Thank you, brothers. So tonight's topic is the ins and outs of Masonic research, a look at how the Masonic student can research the history of Freemasonry. So with this topic, as we know it, Freemasonry is filled with a lot of symbols and also just wonderful allegories. It's also a rich and wonderful, has a rich and wonderful history. It can be a wonderful thing to research. In some way, shape, form, or fashion, we're all connected to our Masonic ancestors, and it's this connection is illustrated within the history of our craft. Tonight, we'd like to discuss how we each started our own individual quest within the history of Freemasonry. We'll also briefly discuss the history of Prince Hall researchers and offer tips on how you can research the history of the craft. So without further ado, let's get started. So how did each of us, get started in our studying Masonic research? Brother Collins, we'll let you go first. Can you hear us, Brother Collins? Okay, we'll come back to Brother Collins. Brother Morgan, how did you get started?
Thank you. Yeah, well, basically, my story is a very interesting one, I would say. I became a Master Mason in 2010, right around the time that a book called Out of the Shadows came out by past Master Alton Roundtree. That was kind of, I would say, my start in really doing research, after I joined, beyond just what it took to become a member. And having Brother Roundtree in D.C. really impacted me a lot because, he to date has probably written more books out of any living Prince Hall Mason. So I was introduced to the world of scholarship and within the craft, and at the time I was a student at Howard, so writing and reading and researching wasn't anything new to me at the time. But I thought it was fascinating that there was this whole world about the black male experience within Prince Hall Freemasonry that I really didn't know anything about, and I don't think has been really studied to the level it should be. So I wanted to learn more, not only about my jurisdiction, but about what was it that I had joined and what was the legacy that made Prince Hall Freemasonry unique to other systems of craft Freemasonry out there. Over time, I began writing for the Prince Hall Masonic Digest, which I have a column in as well. And I'm even published in the Philaxis Society magazine, including the newest one. I'm a shameless plug myself. I have a paper in the newest one as well. And that was basically it. And then just getting online, various chat rooms and e-boards and stuff like that, and brothers like yourself, and you know, I just wanted to learn, and eventually I got to a point where instead of me asking questions so much, I started having people ask me questions. So you know, I'm still a student, but I feel honored that people come to me for information because I'm still learning. And I think all four of us would say that you learn something new every day. So that's my story.
Definitely. Brother Collins.
Thanks, Brother Casey. Essentially, I really got interested in history coming from, honestly, from grade school all the way up to today. About 2006, I found myself, when I first moved back to Alabama after living in Washington for a while, where I really got interested in my family history. And, you know, I got involved with the lodge even more. And, you know, I always talk about, in most of my talks, the new breed of Freemason, where we see and we hear things and we ask the question, well, where did that come from? And the new breed of Freemason, we're of the ilk where, don't tell me because I said so. I want to know where it came from. And I think that mantra is starting to spread more and more, and that's what really got me interested in it. I caught the bug when, you know, the Grand Lodge of Alabama, we were looking at our history. We're trying to write a succinct history, and slowly but surely we started looking for things, and I fell in love with the proceedings, the feel, the texture of the old proceedings, the smell, and you see Dave smiling. Dave knows exactly what I'm talking about. You know, those old books. Up here in the back, you'll see our old Grand Lodge proceedings and some of the original proceedings. You know, once you get that, you catch that fever, you don't let go, and that's how I really got involved with it, and I'm really interested in it. And I think that there should be a distinction between people who just loved history and people who are considered historians, because the historians aren't just looking for something. They get involved in it, they get entrenched in it. And what ends up happening is, once you start studying the history, you'll get sidetracked because somebody will ask you a question, and what you've been researching for so long, you'll get sidetracked and you'll go to something else. But I really think that's where I got it, you know, that new mantra of, you know, don't just say because you said so. I want to actually crack the book open and actually read it and learn it for myself.
Indeed. Brother Gillard?
All right. So my story a little interesting as well. I got interested in Masonic research about 2008. I was serving as junior warden of my lodge. And one day while I was in a meeting, I happened to look over at our lodge charter, and it was pretty faded. It was hard. It was very hard to read. So I asked the worship master at the time, Edwin Jackson Sr., what do we have to do to get a new charter? So he told me the steps. And I ended up contacting Doug Evans, who was the grand historian at the time. Doug told me the thing I need to find out was who was our first three officers. So I looked at our old minutes, and our minutes go back to December 1891. I started reading the minutes. I went through everything I could possibly find. I started looking at our old treasurer's books, which go back to December 1891 as well. The more I read, the more I got interested in the history. So I contacted Doug and told him I was not able to find anything about our first officers in December 1888. And I found in the minutes where the secretary actually got upset with the lodge and didn't bring the minutes back. So at the December meeting of 1891, the lodge voted to always keep the records wherever the lodge was meeting. So that's why we still have them today. So through several conversations with Doug, he was telling me that if I'm really serious about Masonic research, I need to understand and know the history of my lodge. Once I got a good grasp on the history of my lodge, then I could branch out and learn the history of the other lodges in my district. And once I got a good understanding of those lodges in my district, I could then move on to the Grand Lodge history. So even though at the time we couldn't find the officers of the first three officers of my lodge, we actually went with the officers who was in place prior to elections in December. And then later on, in later years, Dr. Ron Robinson, who's the Grand Assistant Historian, actually found the December 1888 proceedings, which lists who our officers were in 1888. So it was that conversation with Doug that kind of lit the spark, and I just got hooked ever since. And as Ken said, once you cracking open the books and you fill in the old proceedings and you get the smell and you read the conversations, you get involved. It feels like you're actually back in those times. Like you can hear these people in different meetings talk about what was going on during that time. So that's really how I got started for me, and now I'm just hooked.
Yeah. Something I want to note about that with what Ken said. I talk about this in the paper that I published. The last episode, I started off and I dedicated it to my ancestor Joe McBride. Well, the thing I don't know if I said it in the last episode, but I talk about in the paper is that same thing was I was helping Ken digitize some of those Alabama proceedings, some of those books y'all see behind him, and I'm going through and I found my fourth great grandfather as a member of a lodge, which I was actually looking for another relative. I was shocked. So I definitely understand what you're saying. You get that shaky, you just don't know what to do. You just want to explode at that point. So it's very important that we keeping minutes and keeping proceedings is very important so we can pass it down through generations.
Definitely. I mean, personally speaking, and I think Brother Ken hit on it earlier. When he was telling us how he got interested in it, I've always been interested in history. Just even my major, I majored in African and African American studies at the Ohio State University. Just putting that plug out there. But I just always had an interest in history in general and African American history in particular. So when I started, through reading, even before I came into the craft, I just, I had a thirst for wanting to know why and when something happened. So when I initially joined the lodge, and I discovered that my lodge was founded in 1852, knowing the conditions that existed during that time period, it really got me interested to dig a little deeper into the lives of the men that really created my lodge, and then further research led me to discovering that the Grand Lodge that I'm a member of played a key role within the spread to spread Prince Hall Freemasonry throughout the country. So reading our history book by Brother Wesley, and then also the original history book written by past Grandmasters Parham and Brown, which really delved more into the individual brothers. It really gave great biographies along their for their lives. It really just it kept you going, and just like you said, to have to be reading the proceedings and to really get so deep into it that you actually picture yourself there during that time period when all of this stuff was going on, and then not only that, but then taking that information and sharing it with other brothers and other people that are interested in Freemasonry. It really, it's just something that really keeps you going. So thank you for sharing that, brothers. As I mentioned, and we talk about, the things that interest us within Freemasonry. By no means is researching Freemasonry amongst members of the Prince Hall craft. It didn't start last year and the year before that. We're part of a heritage of researchers. So at this time, Brother Morgan, we're going to just go over briefly the history of Prince Hall researchers.
Okay. I'm giving a Cliff Notes version because had some things going on this weekend, so brothers, just bear with me 1 second, but it's going to be real short and sweet and to the point. Let's see here. Y'all should. 1 second. Let me see. Y'all see the slideshow? So okay, so this is basically a brief overview of Prince Hall writers and researchers. For those who do not know who this man is, this is Major Martin R. Delaney. He was a very prominent Prince Hall Mason in the 1800s. He was actually the first African-American field officer in the United States military, and he was appointed by President Lincoln. Brother Delaney was out of St. Cyprian Lodge in the jurisdiction of Ohio, and he penned what is considered to be the first actual treatise on what was at that time called Negro or colored Freemasonry, which is this pamphlet right here, The Origin and Objects of Ancient Freemasonry, and its introduction to the United States and legitimacy among colored people. Very, very long title, so that was kind of the style back then. But this book is considered really to be the first book on Prince Hall Freemasonry by a Prince Hall Freemason. Before that, you did have speeches and you know, smaller kind of leaflets and things of that nature, but this was the first kind of you know, book, if you will. In this book, Brother Delaney basically argues for the legitimacy of Prince Hall Freemasonry, which is a topic I'm sure we'll get into at a later date. But he basically says, well, hey, if people like Albert Pike or Albert Mackey want to trace Freemasonry back to the ancient Egyptians and Sumerians and all these other places, these are places where you will find brown and black-skinned people. So how can you take a system that was that's based upon earlier systems of initiation that were found in the Middle East and North Africa and West Africa? How can you take this and then say that we're not legitimate and that black men can't be Freemasons? It doesn't make sense. From there were several other writers who I didn't include in this presentation, but probably the one who sticks out the most in the next epoch, if you will, for after Brother Delaney is probably William H. Grimshaw. He was past Grand Master of my jurisdiction, the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of D.C. He was a member of Social Lodge Number 1. He was the author of a book which has now been very much widely discredited, called The Official History of Freemasonry Among Colored People of North America. That book is widely read, even to this day is widely cited by various authors, but a large part of it, particularly the earlier portions dealing with who Prince Hall was, his life, African Lodge 459's formation, and things of that nature, have been proven to be erroneous. The one thing I will say that Grimshaw kind of did was he tried to make Prince Hall someone who was relatable. He tried to give Prince Hall Freemasonry a cohesive narrative, which he did do, although it was largely based on his own imagination, and I even argue that I think that Grimshaw actually probably was writing down some oral history that that either was not documented or just through the generations had been taken, things that had been taken out of context. And I'm not going to bore you all with those details tonight, but if anybody has any question about that, I'll be glad to answer in the question and answer or in private. Excuse me. The next two brothers I want to talk about, these are, to me personally, these are kind of the twin pillars of Prince Hall writing and research. The brother in the black and white is Brother Charles H. Wesley. Charles H. Wesley was a former professor at the Howard University, since everybody wants to shout out their alma maters tonight. He was also initiated, passed, and raised in Hiram Lodge Number 4 here in the District of Columbia. He later went on to serve as president of Wilberforce University. But he wrote a book, which I think I talked about in the last episode, Prince Hall Life and Legacy, as well as a history of Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Ohio. Prince Hall Life and Legacy, to me, is a monumental book. Anything written before it, in my opinion, is subject to suspicion, primarily because a lot of the things that were written before his book were based on Grimshaw's, again, erroneous statements in his work. Brother Wesley took time and did what scholars are supposed to do, which is that he dealt with primary as well as secondary documentation, some of which he put in his book, and he always made sure he gave references. His book, over time, we may have found new information to build on, or we may have gone back and said, well, hey, he was wrong about this, or whatever the case is. But his book has still stood the test of time, and I actually recommend it in all the classes that come into my lodge. And I think if you're a Prince Hall Freemason or you're interested in Prince Hall Freemasonry, that book needs to be in your library. It really does. Also, the brother in color, another pillar who actually was, if you will, a student of Wesley, Brother Joseph Walks. Brother Walks is arguably the most prolific writer in Prince Hall Masonic history. Again, I say that arguably, but he wrote on a wide variety of topics. Probably his most famous work would probably be Black Square and Compass. That's actually the book that I was first introduced to Prince Hall Freemasonry through. Brother Walks, one thing I like about him and his writing style, because he wrote several works on Prince Hall Freemasonry, from the history of the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Louisiana, the history of the Prince Hall Shriners, history of the United Supreme Council of Scottish Rite for Northern Jurisdiction. But the thing I like that Brother Walks brought to the table in a literary way is that he links Prince Hall Freemasonry to the African American experience, and still tells the story of how Prince Hall Freemasonry got to where it is. He really was not only a great Masonic historian, but I would say he was a great cultural historian as well. He really helped contextualize a lot of the things that were going on in Prince Hall Masonic history. From these two brothers, there have been many other writers and researchers who have come forth. You've had brothers like Brother Alton Roundtree, who I mentioned earlier, Harry A. Williamson, who actually preceded these brothers. But there's so many writers. Like I didn't get a chance to include all of them, but these are probably the main four names that I would say if you need to be aware of four brothers who've written on Prince Hall Freemasonry, these are the four that you need to be aware of. Anybody else is probably going to be on this panel. And with that, I turn it back over to you, Brother Captain.
Thank you, brothers. And some of those writers, as Brother Morgan alluded to, we just wanted to give a brief. It's one of those things, once again, that we can spend a whole show on talking about the various writers, and the brothers that are really putting in a lot of work and inquiries. It seems like after Brother Walks came on the scene and definitely wrote his books, there was a brief lapse in with brothers, publishing books. But lately we're seeing, within the last 5 or 6 years, we're seeing the the rebirth of the Prince Hall researcher and all of the research that they're putting in, both by publishing books, articles, giving presentations on the history of the craft, and it's really expanding even beyond beyond what those earlier brothers put forth. I think some of those other brothers were really concerned with legitimizing Prince Hall Freemasonry. So a lot of their research went into that. Now we're way past that point now, and so now you're seeing the brothers are going back, re-examining certain things, reinterpreting certain things based on new information, and we're still discovering. Even after all of these many years, we're still discovering new things about what took place years and years ago. So thank you for that presentation. So if tips, if I was coming into the craft brand new, just finish the process and everything, and I'm interested in researching, what tips would we offer, brothers? Brother Gillarm, any tips for brothers?
Absolutely. Thanks, Brother Caffey. One of the things that I like to use is, and I'm going to go into detail a little bit later, non-Masonic resources to do Masonic research. If you can see, this book's called Black American Series. This one just happened to be about Columbus. You can probably do a Google search and see if they have one of these books in your area. One of these books for your area. It tells about Black history of your city. You may not know everything, but you'll start to learn names and faces, and you can start putting that. You can start matching up to lodgements, and you can start understanding the connections. This is another great book. If you in Athens, Georgia, and you don't have the story untold, I really don't know what you're doing with your life right now. This is one book that you definitely want to order to learn about the Black history of Athens, Georgia. Now, I'm going to try this. Hopefully it works out okay.
Use the force.
All right, can you all see this? See this fine?
We just see you. Now you're good.
All right. This is another tip for your researchers out there. And if you know me, you know I love Georgia history. So this story about Reverend James Maryland Sims, and I titled this Researching Outside the Box. Georgia history has always stated that Reverend Sims traveled to Boston about 1864. And while he was there, he joined the Union Army, he was ordained as a minister, and he also became a Mason. When he came back into Georgia, he helped establish our first two lodges, Eureka Lodge number 11 and Hilton Lodge number 13, and became the first Grand Master in 1870 of what we now know as the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Georgia. Then he went on to help charter other lodges under this newly formed Grand Lodge, and that's where the story goes. And that's what's been told over the years since Dr. Butler first wrote his book in 1911, titled "The History of Colored Men in Georgia." Everybody has always started with James Sims coming back into Georgia, but why did he travel to Boston in the first place? And this is where you got to use some of the non-Masonic resources. The story is very deep. It starts off about 1850. Shadrach Minkins was an escaped slave from Virginia, and he went to Boston, where he became a waiter, and continued to live his life as a free man. 1850 is also the same year that Congress enacted the Fugitive Slave Act. This Slave Act basically said that if slaves escaped slavery, that their slave owner could contact the police, and those slaves had to be returned back to their owners. So Shadrach Minkins was working. So undercover officers came in, and on February 15, 1851, they arrested him and immediately took him to the courthouse. On the right, you have Robert Morris, who was a lawyer. Robert Morris was one of the lawyers that tried to act on his case, and by filing a writ of habeas corpus, they tried everything in their power to get Shadrach Minkins free legally. This attempt failed. So on the left, you have Lewis Hayden. Lewis Hayden was one of the abolitionists in Boston. Now, these two names you're going to want to remember for the end of the story. Lewis Hayden and his posse came into the courtroom, grabbed Shadrach Minkins, brought him out, and helped him escape out of Massachusetts. Shadrach then went to Canada via the Underground Railroad, where he lived his life as a free man. So these two were some of the abolitionists in Boston. So in comes Thomas Sims. Thomas Sims was James Sims' brother, and he was located in Savannah. Both Thomas and James were former slaves. James was allowed to purchase his freedom, where Thomas was too valuable and was not allowed to purchase his freedom. So at the age of 17, he was joking with a slave owner and told him that he was going to escape from slavery. Usually, there was going to be some type of punishment. Everybody thought it was a joke for some reason, and Thomas Sims jumped on a boat and escaped to Boston. While he was there, Mr. Potter found out exactly where he was. It's rumored that Thomas Sims wrote a letter back to his wife and was trying to bring his wife and kids up to Boston, and the slave owner found the letter. So on April 4th, 1851, Thomas Sims was arrested. Now, if you remember earlier, Shadrach Mencken had just escaped. Lewis Hayden and his crew came into the courthouse, and this act scared the city of Boston. Lewis Hayden caused the city to completely change the way they operated. They were embarrassed. They did not want to allow this situation to happen again. So they changed their procedures. While Thomas Sims was in court, they chained up the doors of the courthouse. That way you can only pull them open so far. That will prevent Lewis Hayden and his crew from getting in, stealing Thomas Sims, and bringing him out. The mayor also allowed his police officers to be deputized. And on April 11th, when they were transporting Thomas Sims back into slavery, 300 police officers and soldiers took him from the courthouse to the naval yard, where another 250 soldiers were waiting on him. So this city was so scared of Lewis Hayden that they had 550 armed men to ensure that Thomas would return back to Savannah and be a slave again. So Lewis Hayden was definitely a game changer. So Thomas Sims returns back to Savannah, and then he later moves around and ends up in Vicksburg, Mississippi, where he escapes from slavery again. This time he runs into the Union with General Ulysses S. Grant, and Grant allows Thomas Sims to pass on to Boston, where he continues to live out the rest of his life as a free man. And during his interview, Thomas Sims told General Grant about the Confederate forces in Vicksburg, and that their numbers were vastly exaggerated. So now we reunited again. James Sims didn't just randomly go to Boston, Massachusetts because he had nowhere else to go. He went to Boston, Massachusetts because that's where his brother had went back to. He just wasn't ordained as a minister in any particular church. He was ordained in the 12th Baptist Church, where the pastor Pastor Grimes was the one who petitioned to have blacks be armed for the Union Army. And he acquainted himself with the same men who helped try to free his brother from slavery. So when James Sims returns back to Georgia and starts establishing lodges, he gets permission to do so and receives his first charter from Lewis Hayden, who was the Grand Master of Massachusetts, and his deputy Grand Master, the number 2 man in charge, was Robert Morris, the same 2 men that tried to help his brother. So to get this story, if you just looked in the minutes, all you're going to see is James Sims come back to Savannah. You're not going to understand the rest of the story as to why he went. And that's for a tip that I would have for any researcher. Don't just look at what happened. Look at why it happened. Some of the sources I use Genealogy Bank to get access to old newspapers. I use Ancestry.com. I use Newspapers.com. I use Accessible Archives. Sometimes I just go to a local library and look up old census reports and other items. So you would definitely have to look. You have to think outside the box when you're doing Masonic research. If not, you're gonna miss the story. Yeah. And thanks, Brother Caff.
Dave, if I could add one thing onto that. By the way, that presentation was beautiful on the Sims brothers. One thing I like to do as well is, as you know, family history is important to me, but I also look at associations as well, because a lot of times what you find in those abolitionist circles, particularly, is they might be a member of another fraternal organization or abolitionist society and the same Masonic lodge, and it's all the same group of people just playing musical chairs. So if you are looking for whether it's an ancestor or a particular prominent leader, and you notice that, hey, every time I turn around, he's with these same 4 or 5 guys, a lot of times they might have been in the same lodge together or something of that nature. So it goes back to that old saying, tell me who your friends are and you tell me who you are. It's that kind of thing. Yeah, but again, beautiful presentation, brother.
And Brother Morgan, your tips.
I mean, I think I just said it, but I mean, I would say, beyond that, I think they really summed it up pretty well. I would say just leave no stone unturned. You know, you'd be very surprised at utilizing university archives. I'll stress this. I will stress Grand Lodge proceedings. Actually going to get them. You know, whether your Grand Lodge has them or your lodge or talking. I'm a very big proponent of just sitting down and talking to older members of your lodge. Do an oral history project of your lodge. Like, who were the founding members of your lodge? I think, Dave, you talked about that very well from your perspective. For me as worshipful master of my lodge, I recognize that this year that I'm serving is my lodge's 99th year, and should I serve a second term, I will be master for my lodge's 100th anniversary, which is a huge honor for me. But I really didn't know anything about our earlier members from when we were established in 1916. When I started tracing my lodge history back, I discovered and actually published the fact that Bishop Edgar Amos Love, who was a co-founder of Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated, and also a fellow Howard alum like myself, he was a charter member of my lodge. But not only him, we had our first worshipful master, whose seat I now sit in, Brother Emery B. Smith, was a very prominent reverend and lawyer here in the District of Columbia. And one of my pride and joys that I found when I was researching his life was that our early lodge members were very, very into studying the black scholars of that day. And one of the earliest articles I was able to find was they actually had a study group going on at the time, and they were reading one of the books by W.E.B. Du Bois. But they took out a flyer, they took out an advertisement in the newspaper. They said, well, this is the book we're studying by Dr. Du Bois, but this is a special program because Dr. Du Bois is in D.C., and he's coming to our study group. And I was like, what? You know, finding a letter, you know, and for those who don't know, W.E.B. Du Bois was a Prince Hall Mason as well. So to find out W.E.B. Du Bois had some contact with with the first worshipful master of my lodge, and our early lodge members were very into the Pan-Africanist movement. You know, I consider myself a Pan-Africanist as well. I thought that was really fascinating to kind of get a glimpse into who these people were, the kind of agency that they had. Beyond that, I would just say, you know, if you're studying Prince Hall Freemasonry, just recognize that we were, as an organization, we were involved in a lot of different things, even though people don't know us to be. So a lot of people might know about Brother Shadrach Minkins, but they might not know that Lewis Hayden was Grand Master of Massachusetts. You know, so you have to look at people from all angles. So, like I said, just leave no stone unturned.
Thank you, brother. Brother Collins.
Well, I just want to hop in here and piggyback on what Brother Morgan as well as Brother Gillarm said. I'm a big advocate of cross-referencing information, where we know that Grand Lodge proceedings are the be-all to end-all of most of the information. Not only that, you're looking at your lodge minutes are going to give you a lot of information, but like they said, you're also going to see some of the information coming down from newspaper articles. One thing that we also find a lot of good information inside of are like the Christian monitors, the Christian newspapers. They're giving you detailed information on what's actually going on in the black community in those areas. But aside from that, like James said, inside of the university archives, you know, you never know what you're going to stumble upon in some of these collections. The Amistad Research Center has a treasure trove of Prince Hall related information, as well as Masonic related information, as well as the Moreland Spingarn at Howard University. Some of the information that I've been able to glean about our Grand Lodge is actually stored at Howard University. You would never find a connection between the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Alabama and Howard University. But once you started getting into the history of the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Alabama, you'll notice that Grandmaster SSH Washington actually graduated from Howard University Medical School. You'll find out that Charles Henley actually went to, Grandmaster Charles V. Henley actually went to Howard Law School and did his undergrad at Howard University. You'll also find that Grandmaster S.J. Bennett also graduated from Howard Law School. And another one of the tall cedars of Lebanon in Alabama, a gentleman by the name of H. Council Trenholm, the president of Alabama State University. He had his records sent to Howard University and they're stored there. So I'm talking to Miss Joellen Bashir,
Bashir,
and she brings out she brings out this treasure trove of information, and I'm literally awestruck. I'm there. I took 2 or 3 days just to go up there, getting information, writing information down, and just getting it. But what I want to do is I want to show you just a quick glimpse of how you try to cross-reference information in terms of looking at just bear with me one moment. Just bear with me, get this straight. Okay, just bear with me, please. But what I'm going to do is I want to take you through a quick process of looking at how and why you would use this particular format to cross-reference your information. Because what you're going to be looking at in particular, you're going to be taking a view of Grand Lodge proceedings, but aside from Grand Lodge proceedings, you're also going to be taking an open view of what's going on inside of the Constitution, but also other organizations as well. And when I'm saying other organizations, we're actually looking at other Grand Lodges. So what we're going to do, we're going to take a quick glimpse. Start to screen share. Let me know if this is running, gentlemen.
Yep, you good. I can see it.
You good to go? Okay. Okay, so we're just going to look at cross-referencing research methods as far as cross-referencing sources. So I'm going to give you a prime example of what happens with me and some of the research that we're doing here in Alabama. If I can get the slide to change now. Okay, so you're looking at your first line of research. You look at, are we able to see the first line of research slide?
No.
Can you see it?
No, it went away.
Okay. How are we now?
No.
Okay. What I'll do is I'll just go through them as I see them. So your first line of research, you're going to be taking a look at, in particular, Grand Lodge proceedings. You're going to look at, first thing first. You don't call your Grand Lodge to see if they're copies of the proceeding. The second piece is going to be, and the one piece that I'm talking about as far as this form is, I was looking for the rituals in terms of our Grand Lodge, because in about 1939, in one of our Grand Lodge proceedings, Grandmaster Charles B. Henley speaks and says that Lester's Look to the East is going to be our Grand Lodge monitor, what we consider a monitor or our ritual. So what we look at, what we end up seeing is, that we don't know what happened before that particular time. So inside of, when we talk about looking at, are we back on? Okay.
We can see and hear you.
Okay. So trying to get this back on. I'm sorry, gentlemen. So I'll just hop back in it. Okay. So what we're looking at is, in particular, is you're looking at your Grand Lodge proceedings, you're looking at your Grand Lodge Constitution, and we were trying to find out, in particular, what ritual were we using before 1939. So the first thing I did, I started going back in our Grand Lodge history. So we have, during the World Wars, we began to see a couple of gaps in our history. because we don't have proceedings for those particular years. So once we started seeing those in particular gaps, we had to go back even further. So I ended up talking to a lady that knew the Henley family, and she had an actual brand new copy of our 1903 Grand Lodge Constitution. And inside of it, they talk about, and this is what's really strange for me to be able to see this, inside of this Grand Lodge Constitution, it actually says that the Grand Lodge is working with the Grand Lodge of a gentleman out of the Grand Lodge of Georgia, and also one of the gentlemen that wrote the Masonic Monitor Aiken's Lodge manual out of the Grand Lodge of New York. I'm sorry, out of Georgia. So John Aiken is what we consider one of the mainstream Masons out of Georgia, is working with the Prince Hall Grand Lodge in Alabama to actually write their ritual, and he's allowing them to use it almost word for word, verbatim. Our ritual, our Lodge of Sorrow, all of this is coming from there. But again, the whole effort of this is trying to get back and keep going back. So once we go from 1939, we're able to jump back to 1903. But then when we go back a little bit further, you start to see it again. This is why we consider it cross-referencing information. In 1891, we end up seeing, I wish you could see the proceedings, that way you could actually see what's written. In 1891, Grandmaster Reuben R. Mims states it in his Grand Master's address, and he states that the Grand Lodge take into consideration the necessity of changing the ritual in view of contingencies which are apparent to the observant. So here we have him talking about our ritual, but again, we still don't know what ritual that we're using. So further in the proceedings, we have to keep, again, you have to keep cross-referencing the information to try to see what else is coming along. And what we end up seeing on the Committee on Grandmaster's Address, and I'll read it in totality, they say, with all due deference to that part of the report recommending a change in the use of rituals, we express non-concurrence from the fact that those in the use of the brethren have familiarized themselves with, and we are not disposed to admit that there is anything new in Masonry other than that which has come down to us through the ages, and challenges the admiration and wonder of our time, and the genius and intellect of the men today can furnish no improvement. We will therefore recommend that the old should not be sacrificed for the new, but the old should be maintained unsullied as handed down before us. So what that's telling me is we have to keep our old ritual. And from there, that's why I keep saying you have to cross-reference the information. So once you go through your Grand Lodge proceedings, your constitutional proceedings, you have to look at your parent Grand Lodge. So this was actually our eureka moment. So once you're looking at your Grand Lodge history, and this is something that I also recommend to researchers, you have to contact other Grand Lodges to say, hey, do you guys have any information on? I actually contacted Brother Caffey regarding what was the original monitor that they used, and we weren't able to find anything. But lo and behold, once we start to keep digging and digging and digging, we were able to pull up some of these old proceedings. I found in the Grand Lodge of Ohio's 1862 earliest proceedings stating that the Mystic Circle continued usage, and the Grand Lodge actually says, no, we don't want to use the Mystic Circle. This is a book that came out in the early 1840s, 1850s, and it was used widely throughout the United States. And it was actually the contemporary, which people don't know today, it was actually contemporary, the antagonist to Mackey's jurisprudence. And at the time, Mackey's jurisprudence was actually having a fight with Mystic Circle. And Ohio's Grand Lodge was using it, but the brothers felt that Mackey was gaining so much traction that they actually opted to use Mackey's jurisprudence. Now, Mystic Circle is not necessarily a monitor, but it did basically state how to run the lodge and how the lodges are supposed to be ran. But what we found very, very interesting, and this is where we got our eureka moment. It says motion. Excuse me. What we end up seeing is that the Grand Lodge opts to use the Smith Webb monitor as its Grand Lodge ritual. So what we learn here is Alabama's first members who came in 1859, they were brought in under the Smith Webb monitor. So Alabama's Grand Lodge worked directly with Ohio's Grand Lodge in establishing its lodge and establishing its Grand Lodge. So that would lead us to believe through the information that we keep the old, don't sacrifice the old for the new. Excuse me. That Alabama was actually using the Smith Webb monitor. So this is what I'm talking about, cross-referencing the information, going from your Grand Lodge proceedings, transferring it over to the Constitution, talking to the older members, identifying information, crossing state lines, asking other state Grand Lodges what were they using, did they have any information on this particular issue as far as ritual, and then what we end up doing, we end up going into their Grand Lodge proceedings and getting the answer that we've been looking for. So, you know, history isn't always linear. You're not always going to open up a book and it's going to say, this is where it's at. You're actually going to have to take the time, and this has been well over a year that I've been looking for this, and I happened to stumble across this when we got the 1862 proceedings, not even a month and a half ago. So this has been over a year and a half project that we're able to find just by cross-referencing the information.
Ken, you know, something I thought was interesting about your presentation is that you mentioned that how you had contacted you know, Brother Gillarm and Brother Caffey and whatnot, and I think we're kind of leaving something out here, which is the importance of actually having contacts and you make friends across state lines by doing this kind of work. So you can contact and say, hey, you know, Brother Gillarm, you know, one thing I always will be thankful for with Dave, I remember I was researching something and I was trying to find out some information about this church, and I was talking to Dave. I was actually at my office. And I said, yeah, brother. I said, when you get a chance, if you can let me know anything about this church. He said, oh, well, I'm hopping in the truck right now. I'm going that way anyway. And next thing I know, Dave is out there for like 3 hours looking for this church and this church cemetery or whatever. And you know what? He found some information for me, which was great. But I wouldn't have had that information if I didn't have somebody who I could just call. So social media and whatnot is very powerful. You know, I know I speak for myself. I'm sure for you all as well. If brothers want to reach out to us for things that are in our particular states, you know, reach out, but don't reach out always asking for stuff. Be prepared to try to help somebody else as well. Try to help you know, lift as you climb, kind of thing.
Definitely. I mean, I'm sorry. Go ahead,
just real fast. I'm sorry about that. Just real fast on that particular issue. There's nothing more, and I'm not speaking for all the historians. I'm just speaking for myself. There's nothing more irritating than a brother that begs for information but is not willing to give up information. And as historians, you know, we spend copious amounts of time going through these papers, taking notes, reading information, going through pictures, bulletins, news, you know, just going through so much information, but then you ask for information but you get nothing back. And I have to make a shout out to Brother Spencer out of South Carolina. Brother Spencer out of South Carolina has been a godsend regarding the Ohio proceedings. And I want to also let you know that, Brother Casey, he's been a godsend in putting those together. And again, you know, this is more, it's not necessarily a pay-to-play type thing, because you don't pay for something and somebody else will end up using it. Brother Spencer actually spent his money, but what I did, I took everything, scanned it, and then I collated it into a PDF, into electronic format. So that's the give and take relationship between the historians across state lines.
No problem, brother. You know, and it's
Hey,
you know, go ahead, brother.
If I could add another tip in, researching the AME church history. This is another outside the box type of thing. Myself, Dr. Ron Robinson, we talk about it all the time. Look at the spread of the AME church throughout Georgia, starting in Savannah, and it's just not a coincidence that the first AME church in Georgia and the first worship master for the first lodge in Georgia was the same person. That wasn't a coincidence. We had Bishop Turner here, Bishop Wesley John Gaines. We see them move out of Savannah and move into Columbus. Now we have a lodge here. Then they go to Atlanta, same thing. Macon, Quitman. Everywhere there was an AME church that popped up, there was a Masonic lodge that followed. When Bishop Archibald J. Carey graduated from college at 21 and went out to Athens to pastor out there, it wasn't just a coincidence that Lincoln Lodge number 62 popped up in 1890. So if you're looking for another research tip, learn AME church history in your area. If you learn that church history, you're probably going to run across information about your lodges as well. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. You know, my very brief tips would be, one, to starting on the lodge level, talk to the older brothers in your lodge. You know, we have a wealth of knowledge, a living history within many of our lodges. So I would say not only talk to them, but thankfully with modern technology, tape record a lot of the conversations that you may have with them, because you'll be surprised. Someone 15, 20, 30 years from now will be thankful for that tape recording that you made. I can remember coming in my lodge, I would always hear about rumors of a homemade documentary that was made and shown at the 100th anniversary in 1952 of my lodge. So, you know, I tried to find it, you know, talking to brothers, and, you know, no one knew what happened to it. You know, people started telling these stories, but no one could really pinpoint exactly what happened to it. So what I did was, between talking to some of the older brothers, doing some of my own research, and by no means am I, you know, Spike Lee or John Singleton or anyone else, you know, Lee Daniels or whatever, but I put together my own documentary for my lodge with, you know, simple software that comes on every, you know, laptop probably these days, just so we can have some type of preservation of the history, and then we can pass it on to individuals as well. If your Grand Lodge has a history book that's written by it, and I think it's, you know, sometimes we take it for granted, but read it. You know, if you're lucky to have, there are many of our Prince Hall Grand Lodges that where a history book was written about it. Read that book, and not only read the book, but look at the sources where the author got a lot of that information from. It was said earlier too, you know, you can go to your Grand Lodge and hopefully ask to see and read some of the older proceedings. From my research, I could tell that when a lot of our lodges and Grand Lodges were originally founded, a lot of brothers were more detailed in their writings in some of those proceedings, versus how, if you read the proceedings of the day, they're very, you know, what, where, when, you know, you really don't get a feeling with it. But a lot of those older proceedings, as I mentioned earlier, if you read it, you will actually feel what it felt like being there that day, because they were very descriptive with their writings. Also, years and years and years ago, and some of our Grand Lodges still hold firm to this, but many of our Grand Lodges unfortunately don't, we used to share proceedings a lot. So if your Grand Lodge, and Ken mentioned it earlier, and some of the other brothers mentioned it too, if your Grand Lodge is missing some proceedings, reach out, you know, to some other Grand Lodges. The Iowa Masonic Library has has a wealth of knowledge, and a lot of our proceedings are housed there. So I would urge brothers to take advantage of that opportunity as well. And also, if you share mutual recognition within your own jurisdiction, you know, Brother Collins talked about cross-referencing. It's really interesting also, if you can, to cross-reference your proceedings during a given time period with the proceedings of the other Grand Lodges located in your state too, because you can really get a feel for what Masonry was like for everyone during a time period. So build those relationships not only within the Prince Hall fraternity of Free and Accepted Masons, but also just Freemasonry in general. And then also, and I think every brother hit on this, networking, as was mentioned earlier, it's very, very important. Not only for building just that fellowship, but just being able to pick up the phone, shoot an email or some type of correspondence to get that bit of information. Because, I'm sure many of us, we've been real close to uncovering something, and then we get that final piece of the puzzle from another brother, and it really builds that bond. So I know when I head down to the Grand Lodge, I often tell brothers, hey, I'm going down here, what do you need? And if I can find it, I'll definitely share. And as Brother Collins said, you don't want to be a taker. You also want to provide that information too. So, you have to have, I always say as a historian, it's hard, but you have to have a good memory, because someone may put something out there saying, hey, I need this, so if you come across it, and while you're doing your own research and you stumble upon it, you can just take a quick picture of it, email it to someone, or just get in touch with someone and say, hey, this is something I found that hopefully can, help you with your research. Because if you think about it, especially within the Prince Hall Freemasonry, we're all tied together. So if we can, by putting the story together, and if you look at it as a puzzle, even though something may have happened in D.C. or in Alabama or in Georgia, but it has an impact on me in Ohio as well, because we're all tied together and we're all brothers. So, definitely building that network up. All right. So, brothers, we have some questions that some of our viewers, and if you still have some questions, please feel free to post those and we'll get to them, if we can. But we have some questions from some of our viewers tonight, so I'll just read the first one, and whoever wants to chime in, please feel free to do so. The first question is, brothers, my question is, what are your thoughts on the stance that some take that we focus too much on historical research, trying to prove or disprove origins, versus the more esoteric subjects?
I want to jump on this one real fast, because I think that one of our brothers, Ralph McNeil Jr., who's one of the students of Brother Joseph Walks, he made a statement. It's that the Prince Hall Masonic historian is essentially a Prince Hall Masonic jurist. And why is history so important? Because when you get into history, and remember, ritualistic works is nothing but history. You're following the lodge work inside of the lodge, but the history on the outside is you're also covering the other information on it. So you're looking at more for jurisprudence work. So if you're just looking at the esoteric work, the composition of a lodge, the working tools, the emblematic workings, what you're also missing is the jurisprudence around it. How a lodge is formed. If you talk about an actual, you want to get in the esoteric work, but we're in the exoteric format right now. So if you look at the composition of a lodge, a lodge has to be made from a Grand Lodge, not necessarily from another lodge, unless we're talking about, again, now we're getting into history. When you look at Mother Kilwinning, or you look at Lodge St. Andrews, which is a lodge that birthed another lodge. So when you're looking at actual history, the historical ramifications for things, you actually have to, you just can't talk about ritual. You actually have to talk about jurisprudence, how Masonry works, how ritual fits inside of how Masonry works, and how it comes together into this beautiful system that we're dealing with. Because if not, you're basically going to be having, just like we're having today, Grand Lodges that pop up out of nowhere. Somebody comes up, they go and get they get incorporated, and then the next thing you know, they're calling themselves a lodge just because they have a ritual. But as we as free accepted Masons know, that's not how Freemasonry works. There's a system to Freemasonry. A Grand Lodge charters lodges. A lodge works under a Grand Lodge, but they use a particular ritual. and regularity comes in. Irregularity. Those types of conversation comes in, not necessarily from a ritualistic side, but it actually comes in through the jurisprudence side. That's where you learn from history how to look at these things in as far as the future goes.
I would like to tackle that too, just very briefly. I, I've heard that sentiment before, about Prince Hall, I guess writers or researchers, what have you. Um, I'm a big advocate of when you talk about ritualistic or esoteric topics or education. I'm a big proponent of that should really be done kind of in-house and in lodge, not on a program like this. Or I'm not saying don't write books or what have you, because people do it, and that's actually the direction I like to go in. But I'm really a big advocate for that. Is kind of not, I don't want to say self-study, but that's something that we should do more in-house. When you talk about Prince Hall Masonic history, for me, that's kind of the way to discuss it, not only in an academic sense, but also to give context to who we are as an organization, whether it's internally as well as externally. Because even on this broadcast, I'm sure we may have one or two non-Masons or non-members or what have you, who they might not know or even care about what we do ritualistically. They may or may not. Who knows? But I think that by explaining that look at who our membership is, look at what the history of this organization has been as a whole. To me, that's one of the ways that you kind of grapple in people's interest about possibly seeking membership itself. Well, if Martin Delany and Charles Wesley and all these other great people were members of this thing, well, what is this about? I don't think that we should make it an either or thing, but I do think that there's a time and place for everything. And esoteric and the ritualistic stuff, I take ritual very seriously, so I don't like the idea of us just talking about it all willy-nilly with outsiders or prospective members. Save that for that's the lodge experience. That's what the lodge experience is supposed to be about.
Thank you, brothers. Next question. Has there ever been any research on the 14 other brothers that were raised with Prince Hall?
I'll take that. There have been efforts. The thing that I always tell people about the 14 other brothers that were raised with Prince Hall, and I even hate saying that because it really belittles them, I think, almost. The hard thing, the difficult thing about them is this, and this is where your historian skills have to come into play, is that it's very difficult to learn anything about particular individuals during the late 1700s in the former American colonies, particularly black men specifically, but blacks period, because of slavery and whatnot. I mean, one ongoing conversation that I've kind of been having on the side with some people is that you have to look at those brothers as being what they were. They were Africans, or first or second generation, maybe third generation here in America, maybe. So some of these guys may have had different names. They may have gone by different aliases or what have you. I have located several of the original 15 brothers that we reference in census records, but you don't really, to try to find anybody at that point, unless you were somebody particularly prominent or historically famous, it's very difficult. It's a blessing that we have as much as we have on Prince Hall himself, let alone the other 14. I'm not saying that to discourage anybody, because maybe there's something that I haven't found, but I would just say, to me, the best thing to do on them is to understand not only who Prince Hall was, but look at what the experience was of black men at that time, and you can kind of gauge a little bit about who they might have, what kind of people or what kind of group they may have come from. One thing that we can assert is that there's a good chance a couple of them may have been born in Africa or the West Indies. The transatlantic slave trade was still going strong during the late 1700s. A couple of them may, and we even see in Pennsylvania, again, show me who your friends are. In Pennsylvania, or in Philadelphia specifically, we see a lot of Haitians joining Prince Hall Freemasonry very early on. So I'm quite sure that a couple of them may have come through Haiti or Puerto Rico or Cuba, and ended up in Boston. Again, these are assumptions, but they're educated guesses based upon what was the African American community like at that time. You see what I'm saying? In terms of their individual lives, hopefully more research will come to light. But at this time, unfortunately, we're just kind of stuck on those other 14 for the most part.
I wanted to hop in there on this one in particular. What we don't know about them individually. We can't say that, but what we have learned from Brother Darrell Hodge, which was a godsend find, one of the most important finds I say about Prince Hall history in the past 50 or 60 years, is this obscure article in the Columbian magazine where it basically gives an outline of the African Lodge and what they're doing in African Lodge, where it basically gives a narrative of what the scene is like. They're at a table lodge. They also talk about the accoutrements there. There's a pyramid made out of ivory that's sitting there on the table. They talk about the orator, and the orator is giving basically a synopsis of not only African history. He's a member of African Lodge, but he's actually going into how the members of African Lodge aren't accepted by some of his white brethren in the area. And then he also talks about how can Freemasonry, and this is all in the course of, this is 1788. This is 1788. These are men, and this is the kicker. It's done in Mandingo, in the Mandingo language. So basically, the men that are in the lodge are actually hearing a lecture on Freemasonry in Mandingo, and then it's translated back into English and for this publication. So, you know, these are the little pieces of history that we're learning. And when they're also talking about the lodge meeting, it's actually a table lodge because the author or the orator takes a moment to tell people it's time to drink, and then they take drink of their ale, and then he gets right back into the lecture. And that's why I think that history is so important, that we can't let these things go unknown, because if we don't, they're going to be lost in time. And unless guys like us who are truly interested in history are actually cracking open these books, actually searching these steps and archives. Oh, one more tidbit. Archive.org is a great place to look for old publications, and they'll come up in PDF formats as well as other formats. That's another quick tidbit.
All right. Next question. Why is there so much difficulty obtaining permission from Prince Hall Grand Lodges and gaining access to old records for research purposes?
Let Dave take that one.
Oh man, here we go, buddy.
Tell them the truth, Georgia boy.
All right, so everybody knows me. They know I'm very blunt. The reason why it's so difficult is because they don't know where they're at. They have absolutely no clue on where their own proceedings at. They usually have a historian who's just there in title only. He doesn't even know what the proceedings are. So how can he tell you how to or how can he help you with your question if he doesn't even know? So the difficulty comes in where you really don't have a dedicated researcher, or if you do, you have a person in that position who doesn't even know what they're doing. I can tell you from personal experience, you contact the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Arkansas, you're going to have two people, Past Master Tom Van Buren and Past Master Alex Benton. Those are two grand historians. They will help you out extensively. I had a field day in their library. They almost had to kick me out. You call the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Alabama, you're going to have Ken Collins. He's going to help you out tremendously. You call the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Georgia, you got me. I'll give you what I got. Same thing with D.C., Ohio, South Carolina with Jeff Kennedy and Bruce Benjamin. You got a lot of, even Texas. I've yet to actually talk to their grand historian on the phone, but for stuff I need, I contact Past Master Curtis Black out of Houston. So there is a way to get these proceedings stuff done from these grand lodges, but most cases, the reason why you have so much difficulty is because you do not have a dedicated grand historian, or you don't have a person that takes their job seriously.
Can I jump in there at the end of this one too? Now this is the flip side of it also, is the reason why Grand Lodges also don't give them out is because people take the Grand Lodge proceedings and they don't bring them back. They take the Grand Lodge proceedings and they put them in their personal collections. They take the Grand Lodge proceedings and they destroy them. So that in and of itself is an extremely, extremely important piece. One of the projects that I've done is I basically scanned all of our Grand Lodge proceedings to make sure that they're electronic. And we make sure we have them in electronic format. And then now we can start to put them in the acid-free sleeves and start to store them away. And if somebody wants a copy of them, we can give you a PDF copy of the electronic copy. Now we're not giving you the actual copy because, you know, it's just reality. Some of them are falling apart. You know, I hear about, I happen to call one of our lodges and I'm trying to get some information, one of our original lodges. I'm trying to get some information on our original lodges. And they sent me the actual receipt book from the actual lodge formation. So it's basically the receipt book from 1869 until about 1890. And it was sent to me in a Ziploc bag. And that's really what blows my mind. You know, do you want the information? Yes, you should get the information. But the next question is how are you going to take care of that information? Because I'm not sending you a copy of one of our original, and I don't speak on behalf of the Grand Lodge, but I'm speaking on behalf of the Grand Lodge. You are not getting an original copy of our Grand Lodge proceedings. You know, a young lady happened to give me a copy of she had a handwritten copy of our Grand Lodge formation proceedings. Our Grand Lodge formation proceedings. She didn't want them. I said, well, can I have them? And just bear with me momentarily. She sent me a copy of our original Grand Lodge formation proceedings. The handwritten copy, I'll get this close, of our Grand Lodge formation proceedings. That's stuck in somebody's attic.
For those who don't know, Ken lives 20 minutes away from me, and if his house gets robbed tonight, I had nothing to do with it.
But anyway, that's just a little tidbit I wanted to put in there. That, you know, yes, we want the information, but at the same time, you can't put the original information in people's hands. And also, and I'll go to today's point. Grand Lodges are not investing in the history, and again, it's not a slight to the Grand Lodges. Grand Lodges are not investing in the preservation of our history. And that's where, you know, brothers, if you want to have, you know, these dinners, chicken dinners and, you know, fish fries, you guys need to put money together for us to save money so we can get an ample budget for the preservation of our history. Because if you want it, you should be able to get it. But to get it, you have to preserve it first. That's all I have.
Absolutely. If I could just add a bit of sunshine to that, you brothers were very honest. But one thing I would say is that I'm happy to see is that I think that there is a movement now within the leadership of Prince Hall Freemasonry to really try to preserve and document our history. Dave spoke earlier about Texas. Texas has the Wilbur Curtis Library and Museum, which I was blessed last year to actually get a personal tour by Grandmaster Wilbur Curtis. So I'm in the building, and the space is named after him, which is amazing. And matter of fact, shout out to Grandmaster Curtis for that. But I will also say that one thing I'm happy to see is that several Grand Lodges, I know DC is doing it, I believe Georgia, I think all four of our Grand Lodges have done this, is a lot of these Grand Lodges are now giving their records and proceedings to local universities. Like DC, Howard University is basically the official school of Prince Hall Grand Lodge of DC, for lack of a better term. So some of these Grand Lodges are putting them there, but again, you have to kind of know, even if they have a Grand Historian or archivist, that person may or may not be able, or it may not be dedicated, who knows. But most states generally have somebody. You just kind of got to get on Facebook and look around and ask, you know, hey, who has, you know, the 1902 proceedings of Prince Hall Masonry in Michigan? I don't know off the top of my head, but I'm sure between the four of us, if that's what you're looking for, we could figure it out. You know what I mean? And that probably would be James Young. Shout out to Brother James Young with the Prince Hall Monument organization. You know, somebody knows something. You just have to kind of get out there and ask, even if it's not the Grand Lodge office that you called. Just look around online, you know, and you'd be surprised.
Definitely. Next question, and I think this is a great question. I'm glad to see more brothers taking an active interest in researching and evaluating the facts about Prince Hall history. I'm also glad you all are still learning about what really happened. But the history of Prince Hall, Order of the Eastern Star, seems to have been hidden or neglected. I'm finding that proceedings and chapter documents aren't as readily available or easily found for chapters. So what are some techniques and tips that can be used to research the history of the Prince Hall Order of the Eastern Star?
That's probably Sister Victoria or Sister Huffman out of Florida. It has to be one of those two. Just shout out to those ladies. Again, first things first. That particular organization is very interesting, and I know James will jump in here dealing with Thornton Jackson, because you have two different organizations. Two different. Well, I'll say two branches of the Order of the Eastern Star. You have North Carolina, and then you also have the DC group, and those are two separate entities. Thornton Jackson is seen setting up dealing with the Eastern Star early up in Philadelphia, and then next thing you know, there's the other group that shows up down in North Carolina, and then lo and behold, the new grand chapter, which I'd say again, this is another episode, arguably, that the grand chapter that people like to laud about starting up in DC, and I'll let James pick it up from there.
Oh Lord, why are you gonna make the Grand Matron mad at me? Yeah. Long story short, you know, I would say you're right. It's a very interesting history with that. I myself have found it very difficult to try to research, you know, Eastern Star history. What little bit I've ever tried to research. But this is my challenge. And if there's any sisters on here now or who watch this recording later, this is my challenge, and this is also my pledge as a Mason and as a historian. I believe that the history of Prince Hall or the Eastern Star really should be written by sisters. That's just my personal opinion. I can't, and I've had several chapters here in DC ask me, you know, Brother Morgan, would you write our history or help us research? And I always tell them no, but I'll be happy to help you to tell it, because I can't tell the story of an Eastern Star. I'm not a member of the Order of Eastern Star, but and I'm also not a woman. But I think it would be very interesting to have a dedicated sister or a group of sisters to get together and write something. I do have some resources. I think, you know, chapters and grand chapters I found have been, I don't know what it is. I agree, it's very hard to find it, but hopefully in the future more information will come to light. In terms of the earlier years, like Ken said, I mean, yeah, Thornton Jackson and Georgiana Thomas are really big names here in DC, because they started the Order of Eastern Star here in the District of Columbia, and we kind of get the credit for that. That's debatable, but I'm not trying to have my grandworthy matron mad at me here in DC today. but if anybody wants to talk about it, you know, on the side or at a later date, or maybe even a future episode, I'd be more than happy to get into that with you all.
All right. And last question, brothers. And I apologize, we have a lot of you know, great questions out there, and unfortunately we can't get to all of them. But the last question before we wrap up, for the historian that has studied Prince Hall Masonic history, how do you see the future of Prince Hall Masonry with the changes of today?
I'll pick it up. Can y'all see me? Okay. If we keep going on a trend like we're going now, I think that the future Prince Hall Freemasonry can be a bright one, but we have to recognize the time in which we are in. I think that this program that we've kind of started is a great step forward. As I always like to say I think we're kind of in a renaissance of Prince Hall Freemasonry personally. Our lodges, we might not have the membership like we used to, but I think that the brothers that we have, for the most part, are a lot more dedicated to what it really means to be a Freemason first, but a Prince Hall Freemasonry more specifically. I think that the important thing that the Grand Lodge leadership has to understand is that the younger brothers, newer brothers who are coming in want more Freemasonry, and they want more of this history that we're talking about, here tonight. But the same old things that we used to do, some things, some traditions you stand firm, but some things you have to evolve with the times, whether it's with technology, proceedings. I mean, again, I don't know that brothers were as interested in proceedings 50 years ago as we might be today, but we're in the information age. So if you can't, to me, it's amazing to think that I was born in 1989, and I'm a member of an organization of a Grand Lodge that was founded in 1848. And as Ken did, I don't have the original Grand Lodge proceedings here in my house, but I have dealt with the original minute book of my Grand Lodge established in March of 1848. And when I was going through those pages myself, the book looked very similar to Ken's. The thing that hit me, number one, was that this was actually written by John T. Costin, who was one of my favorite Prince Hall Freemasons of all time. But number two, I'm reading a document about a group of free black men in Washington, D.C., which slavery was legal in the District of Columbia at this time. At the time this paper was being written on, slavery was legal. So to have that and be able to access that was a life-changing experience for me. But if we're not grooming our leadership and grooming our membership to pursue information, then they're not going to stay around. But as long as you give it to them, they will stay. If you build it, they will come. Trust me. That's why I'm here now.
I know it's interesting that the more I read older proceedings, the more I really admire, and not only admire those brothers back then, but also see a lot of the things that they did and preached were some of the things that we may have gotten away from. At one point in time, Masonic education was very, very, very important. And I'm not talking about just learning how to open and close a lodge and different things like that, but really, really studying what it truly meant to be a Freemason, and putting things in place to teach those brothers this education. Really putting an onus on understanding the role that history plays, within the craft, and teaching that to new brothers that comes in. So, the things that we're trying to do, today, is no different, I think, than what a lot of those brothers did back then. I know a lot of the things that we're doing, that we've been blessed to do in my Grand Lodge. A lot of the idea came from just reading old proceedings and saying, hey, this is something that we did and it worked. So why don't we update some of the information for some of these brothers that are coming in, and give them truly what they're looking for, which is Freemasonry. All right. Closing statements. Just want to go around and they have any parting words and words of wisdom, any last second tips you want to give. We'll start out with Brother Gillarm.
All right. I do have some parting tips. I'm trying to find it so James Morgan doesn't jump on me later. If you are in the Columbus, Fort Benning, Phoenix City, Fort Mitchell area on November 4th at 4 p.m. at Columbus State University, they will be unveiling their exhibit, Freemasonry and Fraternalism in Columbus. This is the first time, to my knowledge, that a university in the South has done this type of exhibit and included Prince Hall Masonry into it. So you would definitely see some items from Prince Hall Masonry in Georgia, including right now, if you got a pen and paper, Google this guy, Horace King. There's only 2 handwritten mini books that list Horace King as a member in Georgia, and one of those books is going to be on display on November 4th. So this is definitely an exhibit that you don't want to miss. Some other things about tips and researchers. If it sounds crazy, it probably is crazy. One of the things that's it kills me when I was told this when I was an entered apprentice, that the Boston Tea Party happened because they were looking for for African Lodge's charter. Now, if you use just a little bit of common sense, just a little bit, not a whole lot, just a little bit. The Boston Tea Party happened in 1773. Prince Hall didn't even become a Mason until 1775. So how on earth was they looking for a charter for a person who wasn't even a Mason yet? That doesn't even make any sense. The second thing is, this is going to be addressed on our Grand Lodge website. If you look there now, we have a list of notable Masons in Georgia, and this is something that Brother Sean Daniels actually came up with, that it's been the internet rumor for years that Dr. King was made a Mason after his death. That sounds pretty crazy because it is crazy. Going through the proceedings, nowhere in the proceedings does past Grandmaster Barksdale even mention Dr. King and Mason in the same sentence. And second, how's he going to become a Mason after his death? Doesn't even make sense. So when you hear stuff like this, and you research, and if it sounds crazy, it probably is crazy. And I'm gonna wrap this up. I'll still give a shout out to the St. Louis Cardinals. We didn't win it this year. I am wearing my 1964 championship ring though. I still got faith in my Cardinals. And we're gonna bring on the Knicks. This has been a great experience. If you got any questions, I've been receiving questions through inbox. Hit me up all the time. If you got my number, give me a call. You got my email address, feel free to email me. And I will see you all next month.
Thank you, good brother. Brother Morgan.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. First of all, I want to give a shout out because this really has been a great experience for me. This episode as well as last one. I want to give a shout out to Brother Dre Clark out of Baltimore, Maryland. He hit me up, on the inbox, and we kind of had talked, informally before. But he actually had asked me about Prince Hall Life and Legacy, and he was, asking me about the book. And so I told him, I said, well, brother, I give you the website to go on, which is, I'm going to give them a shout out too, D. Sonny Drew. You can get Prince Hall Life and Legacy off of there. Brother Dre Clark actually went and purchased the book because we discussed it on the last episode. So I want to give a big shout out to him for stepping his game up and trying to do this thing right. So hopefully y'all brothers who are out there who don't have that book will follow his lead. In terms of parting words for the night and tips and tricks, I would just, reiterate everything that was said earlier. Don't be afraid to look at those non-Masonic sources, your family history, the history of your town, whether you go to universities, non-Prince Hall bodies, historically white lodges. A lot of them have libraries in themselves you can check out. Forming a team, making sure that you have brothers who you can rely on and sisters, because a lot of these sisters have information too. Don't get it twisted, as well. And really, I would say be creative. One thing that I'm doing now is I'm actually trying to study Prince Hall Masonic history by looking at other black fraternal organizations. Okay, so do that as well. I mean, other than that, if anybody has any other questions for me or for the group, either put it on, and I will promise if anybody addresses a question to me via inbox, I'm sorry we can't get to everything tonight. If you address to me in my inbox or post on the page and you just tag me in it, I promise you I will get to it. If not tonight, I'll get it. I will respond to your question if you have a question for me specifically. So yeah, but other than that, everybody have a good night and pray for me because I got my Grandmaster's coming to visit my lodge on Tuesday. So pray for me because I'm worship master and shout out to Grandmaster Campbell. Corinthians 18 loves you.
Brother Collins.
Hey, again, it's been great being with everybody, and I wanna read just two simple lines that Joe Walks read as I surmise everything. It says, "Pity," and this is out of the history of the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Louisiana. And Brother Walks writes, "Pity the poor writer and Masonic historian who becomes bitten by the urge to take pen in hand and to write the Masonic histories of the past." And this in particular this is dedicated to our wives and better halves. It says, "I apologize to those I loved who found it difficult to understand the writer's need to lock himself in some small cubicle or spend hours in libraries or pounding away at the typewriter for hours upon hours, obsessed with the works that has overtaken him." And I think this is one of the most important things for our spouses to know, and also for the brothers, that this is a labor of love. We don't get any money from this. Even if you write a book, you're never going to recoup the amount of time that you put into it. And you know, history is, you know, it's something that we can't let go. And as we continue to work on this stuff, again, we don't know everything. We're trying to learn more. And this is something where somebody says they're none of us are know-it-all. I'm constantly on the phone with, or sending a text message to Brother Kathy. I'm constantly calling Dave. Dave, do you know XYZ? Me and James are going on. James says, Candy, did you check your proceedings? Did you check them for this XYZ? Did you look for XYZ? Mm-hmm. You know, it's this constant conversation of history, and this is something that we really want to wrap our arms around and keep pushing to get more information out there. So to the folks out there, we're trying to get more to you, and you know, and to our spouses, our loved ones, even our kids. When you see Dad reading away, we're trying to produce something that we can leave not only for you but others. Also, P.S. as a last shout out, be on the lookout for the Prince Hall History Project. We're trying to get some funders together. We'd like to see a documentary made on Prince Hall Freemasonry. And if we get it up and running, we want to get some professionals actually doing the videography and for Prince Hall Freemasonry to get us just due.
If I could leave one last Walks quote too, it's very short. Joseph Walks always said, verify, verify, verify. Please, brothers, if you're going to research and write something, great. I support you in that, but make sure that you are verifying and whatever you put out is true, please. Other than that, good night.
Thanks, brothers. So, and I think I said this earlier, when, why, and how. Those are three very important words when it comes to research. When did it happen? And then from the information that you've gathered, and then your interpretation of that information, why and how did it happen? These three words drive most Masonic historians and researchers to dig a little deeper. We dig for that, you know, that one name, that one time in history, or that one event, because we owe it to those brothers that came before us, and we owe it to those brothers that will come after us as well, so that we can leave a rich legacy of the craft for them. Thanks for joining us tonight. We hope you've gained a little insight on the Masonic research and some tips as well. We hope you join us for future broadcasts of the Prince Hall Think Tank. Good evening, everyone.